early 2000s, when I first arrived on campus, the occupants in the building were, for the most part, unhappy, sometimes angry about being in the building because their wet labs just were not able to be supported. And some members of the School of Medicine asked things like, can we demolish the building? And so I would always be there saying, this is a National Historic Landmark. It is designed by internationally known Philadelphia-based architect Louis Kahn, and it has to be respected. It is a piece of art venerated all over the world. Kahn's original intent for the design was from a piece of architecture, but also from a functional perspective. He was making an architectural masterpiece from a modern architecture perspective. He was in the context of kind of glass box modernism, where you look at the modern building of the time, of the 40s and 50s, and you could not tell actually what was going on inside the building. So what I think he was really trying to do with this building is re-look at what is modernism and try to make the building expressive on the outside of what it was actually doing on the inside.
Louis Kahn, when he designed this building, was very interested in the idea of served and servant spaces. And the building is set up with 4 towers. One of the buildings is all the service spaces, and it had the wet labs, it had the elevators, the bathrooms, all the mechanical systems were in the central tower. And then the 3 towers around it were meant to be laboratory spaces.
He obviously had a lot of experience with architecture offices and how architects collaborate when they're working and how they learn from each other in a big open space. He thought that should apply to biomedical wet lab. So he planned these kind of more open lab spaces than what had been designed previously. The original researchers, when they moved into Richards, were very concerned about his open lab plan. They wanted to define their boundaries, which is what they were used to doing in their previous labs on campus. And they used some of their own funding to reconfigure these open labs into spaces that were more familiar to them. Some of the issues with that were that the HVAC was not reconfigured to kind of align with some of the configurations that they had developed. And immediately it kind of launched into this building that was too hot, too cold, and just was not really designed for some of the partitions that ended up being constructed.
One of the early problems with the building was the huge and, although beautiful, panes of glass. The windows are really large, but they let in way too much sun in the summer, way too much cold in the winter. Researchers having put foil up on their windows, drapes, taping, they could do anything to keep the sun out of their eyes or the cold out in the wintertime.
The project that we just completed solved many of the infrastructure as well as the functional problems for research within the building. In the early 2000s, there became an interest to do neuroscience or neurology related research, and the focus of this research required office space. So we moved out the wet labs, moved in the dry labs, and suddenly this building was able to support the research in a way that made the occupants delighted to be in the building.
The project was done in 3 phases. EYP Architects did the initial preservation plan and restored 2 of the floors in one of the buildings and set the design standards for the partition system and the design of the interior finishes, which are all very closely related to Kahn's original intent. We set a datum of 8'6", and everything was set either above that if it was utility or below that if it was part of the architecture. They also worked with exterior envelope consultant who helped with the restoration of the windows. And it's made a tremendous difference as to cutting down heat gain and heat loss, and it's made the building much more efficient. We're looking now at a close-up of one of the large windows in one of the cantilevered corners of the building, where the Vierendale truss is exposed above with 2 smaller lights of glass, and this huge, over 12-foot long piece of glass sits below it. These are the original stainless steel window frames that were completely restored with all new glazing placed and all new glazing seals. A big part of the exterior envelope repair for this project included concrete repairs. In many locations, the original concrete had spalled off, rebar was showing through. Working with our structural engineer, facade consultant CVM, we cut out patches, worked very hard to find an appropriate patching mix, and went back and covered these up. This elevator is now in what was a shaft that contained exhaust ducts for fume hoods. Those have all been removed from the building. So the space is available. This elevator only drops down 30 inches to the grade plane, but it makes the main entrance of the building accessible to disabled.
I believe that we still kept the building as close to the diagram that he intended, even in its new use, allowing what Kahn actually envisioned as an open lab space to exist closer to what he may have envisioned.
Important in the restoration work was to really let Kahn's original work shine. Inga Saffron, our local architecture critic, said something like, the building has been returned to its Zen-like calm. And I think that's really true. There was all kinds of crazy lights, ducts, conduit all over the place. Partitions were in awkward locations. And we were able to remove all that, put everything back in a very organized fashion, move all the utilities up above the bottom of the truss. And it is a very calming interior space right now, and very functional as well.